In the heart of a biting Chicago winter, where the wind off Lake Michigan sliced through coats like a knife through silk, Sarah Thompson clutched her newborn quadruplets to her chest, their tiny cries piercing the night like fragile alarms. It was midnight on December 24th, 2025, and the snow wasn't just falling, it was assaulting her, each flake a reminder of the cruelty that had just unfolded. Her husband, Michael Reynolds, had slammed the heavy oak door of their upscale Lincoln Park brownstone shut, his face twisted in a mix of relief and finality. "You're not my problem anymore," he'd snarled through the crack before locking it, convinced he'd shed a weight that had been dragging him down for months. Little did he know, the woman he'd left collapsing in the freezing gale was the hidden heir to a trillion-dollar empire, her father a ghost in the world of finance who'd vanished from public record to shield her from enemies who'd stop at nothing. What transforms a devoted mother into a force of unyielding justice? And what fate awaits the man who chose heartlessness, only to discover that night marked the beginning of his own downfall? Before we dive into this tale of betrayal, resilience, and calculated retribution, hit that subscribe button if you're new here. Stories like this thrive on your support. And drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from? Is it the bustling streets of New York, the sunny beaches of California, or somewhere in the heartland like Texas? Your stories keep this community alive. Now let's step into Sarah's world. The door's echo reverberated through the quiet street, lined with holiday lights that twinkled mockingly against the storm. Sarah stood there, barefoot on the icy steps, her hospital gown peeking out from under a thin coat Michael had tossed at her like scraps. The quadruplets, 2 boys and 2 girls, born prematurely just days ago via emergency C-section, wriggled weakly against her, their bodies too small, too vulnerable for this brutal Midwestern cold. "Show my loves," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Mommy's here." But inside, panic clawed at her. Her body ached from the surgery, stitches pulling with every shiver, and the painkillers had worn off hours ago. Behind that door, Michael paced the heated foyer, his mother, Victoria Reynolds, watching with a smug curl to her lips. The divorce papers lay on the antique side table, ink still fresh. "It's done," Victoria said, her voice laced with triumph. "She brought nothing to this family but chaos. 4 kids at once? We can't afford that drain." Michael nodded, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. He'd met Sarah in college, a quiet girl from nowhere special, or so he thought. She had no flashy background, no wealthy parents to boast about. Just a single mom who'd raised her modestly in the suburbs of Detroit. He'd built his life on appearances, a mid-level executive at a logistics firm, leveraging loans to maintain the facade of success in Chicago's elite circles. But lately, the cracks were showing, debts piling up, investors pulling back. Sarah and the babies? They were the final straw, or so he convinced himself. Victoria adjusted her designer scarf, her eyes cold. "You did the right thing, son. Sentimentality sinks ships." Michael poured a scotch, silencing the uneasy twist in his gut. Outside, Sarah was just a memory now, erased like a bad investment. Sarah didn't pound on the door. She didn't scream for mercy. That wasn't her way. Her mother, Elena Thompson, had drilled silence into her as a survival tool. "Words are weapons, Sarah," Elena would say in their tiny kitchen, poring over bills under dim light. "But silence? That's armor." Elena never spoke of Sarah's father, dodging questions with a sad smile. "He's gone, but we're safe because of it." Growing up, Sarah assumed they were just poor, protected from nothing but hardship. But odd things lingered. Anonymous checks that covered rent, a safety deposit box Elena guarded like a secret. "Not for now," Elena had said on her deathbed 5 years ago. "Only if life turns its back on you completely." Now, as the wind howled and the baby's cries grew fainter from exhaustion, Sarah felt that turning point. The brownstone loomed behind her, a symbol of the life she'd tried to build. Michael came from old Chicago money, warehouses, real estate, influence in City Hall. But Sarah had seen the rot, late-night calls from creditors, Victoria's hushed arguments over creative accounting. She'd stayed quiet, believing love meant weathering storms. "We'll make it," she'd tell the babies in utero, rubbing her belly during sleepless nights. A cab slowed, its headlights cutting through the snow, but sped off when the driver saw her disheveled state. The neighborhood was affluent, gates locked, residents tucked away in holiday warmth. Sarah shifted the bundle in her arms, pain shooting through her abdomen. Under one arm, she clutched the hospital folder, discharge papers, a few diapers, and something heavier. Elena's old lockbox, small and unassuming, passed to her without explanation. "If you're ever truly alone," Elena had whispered. The cold was winning. Sarah's vision blurred, but she forced her numb fingers to pry open the box. Inside, no cash, no jewels, just a laminated card with a phone number and an embossed emblem, a stylized eagle over a shield, one she'd glimpsed on Elena's hidden necklace years ago. With shaking hands, she pulled out her cracked phone and dialed. The line clicked instantly. "State your need," a deep voice answered, no greeting, no warmth. "My name is Sarah Thompson," she rasped, tears freezing on her cheeks. "My mother, Elena, said to call if I had nowhere left." A pause, heavy with implication. Then, location confirmed. "Hold position. Extraction in 5. "Extraction?" Sarah blinked, but before doubt could form, a black SUV rounded the corner, lights off, pulling up silently. 2 figures in dark coats emerged, one a medic who gently took the babies, wrapping them in heated blankets. "You're safe now, Miss Thompson," the other said, guiding her inside. As the door closed, Sarah glanced back at the brownstone. Michael's light was still on. He had no idea the storm he'd unleashed. Miles away, in a penthouse atop the Willis Tower, though no records tied it to any name, Alexander Voss sat in a leather chair, staring at city lights through bulletproof glass. He'd built an empire in shadows, tech conglomerates, offshore funds, influence over markets from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Trillions funneled through layers of anonymity. He'd erased his past to protect one thing, his daughter. Elena had been his love, but enemies, rival tycoons, governments, made family a liability. "I'll watch from afar," he'd promised Elena before vanishing. Tonight, the secure line rang for the first time in 28 years. Alexander's hand trembled as he answered. Now, as reports came in, Sarah en route, baby's stable, he allowed a single tear. "Bring her home," he ordered. Sarah awoke in a private jet, cruising over the Atlantic. The interior was luxurious yet restrained, no ostentation, just efficiency. A nurse monitored the quadruplets in bassinets, their vitals steady. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, sitting up gingerly. "Home base," the nurse replied. "Mr. Voss is waiting." "Voss?" The name clicked vaguely, whispers in finance news, a myth more than a man. Hours later, the jet landed on a private airstrip in the Pacific Northwest, fog-shrouded mountains rising like guardians. A sleek estate awaited, perched on cliffs overlooking the ocean. Seattle's elite would kill for the view, but no one knew it existed. Alexander met her in a sunlit atrium, his silver hair neat, suit impeccable. His eyes, her eyes, held a storm of emotions. "Sarah," he said, voice cracking for the first time in decades. "I never wanted this for you." Explanations poured out over tea, his rise from nothing, building Voss Industries into a behemoth. Threats from competitors who'd assassinated associates. Faking his death and trusting Elena with Sarah's safety. Anonymous support through trusts. "I gave you normalcy," he said. "But I prepared for this." Sarah listened, anger mixing with understanding. "You left us. To save you." He paused. "Now, tell me their names, the ones who did this." She did. Michael Reynolds. Victoria Reynolds. Their logistics empire, built on shaky loans and insider deals. Alexander's face hardened. "They'll learn consequences." Back in Chicago, Michael sipped coffee, scrolling news on his phone. A minor glitch, a bank transfer delayed. "Probably the holidays," he muttered. But by afternoon, a key supplier backed out. Market shifts, they claimed. Victoria waved it off. Teething issues. But teething turned to tearing. Audits hit their warehouses, OSHA violations unearthed from dusty files. Investors ghosted calls. A city contract, long secured through backroom handshakes, evaporated. "This isn't random," Victoria said, slamming her laptop. "Someone's pulling strings." Michael laughed bitterly. "Who? We're small fish." Unbeknownst to them, Sarah sat in a war room, screens displaying financial webs. Advisors, lawyers from top firms, mapped the Reynolds vulnerabilities. "Legal, all of it," one assured. "Just accelerated truth." Sarah nodded. She wasn't vengeful by nature, but that night had forged something new. "Proceed." Weeks blurred. Reynolds' logistics stock, traded OTC, plummeted. Lawsuits from anonymous whistleblowers alleged fraud. Media picked up Chicago firm in freefall. Michael paced his office, hair graying prematurely. "How?" he demanded of empty air. Victoria aged overnight, her social circle shrinking. "We offended someone powerful." One night, digging through old mail, Michael found Sarah's hospital folder. A faint outline inside, something removed. Dread bloomed. In Seattle, Sarah held her babies, named after elements: Aria, Blaze, Cove, Drift, whispering futures. Alexander watched, proud. "You don't have to finish this." "I do," she said. "For them." The final hammer, foreclosure on the brownstone. Assets seized via cascading defaults. Michael stood outside, snow falling again, movers loading boxes. "This can't be," he muttered. An anonymous text, "Courthouse tomorrow, 10 a.m. Understand your loss." He went, heart pounding. The hearing dissolved Reynolds' logistics in minutes. Then, in the hall, Sarah appeared, poised, unbreakable. "Michael," she said evenly. "You did this. You discarded us. Now, face the echo." He crumbled. "Who are you?" "A survivor," she replied, walking away. Years on, Sarah built her own path, philanthropy through vast shadows. Her children thrived, never knowing cold. Michael? A broken man in a rented apartment, haunted by regret. If this moved you, subscribe for more tales of American grit and justice. Share your story. Ever been betrayed in the land of opportunity? We're from LA, Miami, Boston. As the calendar flipped to January 2026, Chicago remained locked in a deep freeze that felt personal, almost vengeful. A persistent upper-level trough over the Great Lakes kept pulling down Arctic air masses, one after another, turning Lake Michigan into a steam-shrouded beast that hurled snow squalls across the city at random. Wind chills routinely dipped into the negative teens, and salt trucks rumbled through the night like distant thunder. In Lincoln Park, the elegant brownstones stood silent under heavy snow loads, their holiday lights long since taken down, replaced by the dull glow of security lamps reflecting off ice-slick sidewalks. Sarah Voss, though she still signed medical forms as Thompson out of habit, woke most mornings to a different kind of quiet. The Pacific Northwest estate was wrapped in steady winter rain, the kind that pattered endlessly on cedar shingles and turned the forested grounds into a glistening emerald maze. Inside, everything was calibrated for comfort and safety. The nursery maintained at a perfect 72 degrees, soft classical music piped in at low volume to stimulate the quadruplets' developing brains, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of a restless gray ocean that stretched to the horizon without another house in sight. The babies were 8 weeks old now, and the difference was visible every day. Aria's cheeks had filled out, her dark lashes fluttering as she dreamed. Blaze, the feistiest from the start, gripped fingers with surprising strength. Cove and Drift, the twins who'd needed the most NICU time back in Chicago, now latched confidently during feedings. Sarah spent long stretches in the rocking chair, one baby at a time against her chest, breathing in their milky scent and whispering promises she intended to keep for the rest of her life. Alexander often joined her during these quiet hours. He moved with the careful gait of a man who'd learned long ago that sudden noises could cost lives. He never picked up the babies uninvited. He waited for Sarah's nod, but when he did hold them, his large hands were astonishingly gentle. "They have your mother's eyes," he said one afternoon, cradling Drift while rain streaked the nursery windows. "And my stubborn chin." Sarah laughed softly, the sound still new to her own ears. "Good. They'll need both." Their conversations had grown deeper, more raw. Alexander no longer held back the details of his vanished life, the hostile takeovers in the late 90s that left competitors ruined or worse, the private jet accident staged off the Bahamas in 1998, complete with planted wreckage and paid-off Coast Guard reports, the decades of watching Sarah from afar, school plays through telephoto lenses, college graduation from the back row in disguise, even standing outside the hospital the night Elena died, unable to go in. "I was there when you married him," Alexander admitted one evening by the fireplace, flames casting shadows across his lined face. "I sat in a rented car across the street from the church. You looked so happy. I told myself I'd done the right thing letting you live a normal life." Sarah stared into the fire. "Normal ended the night he locked us out." Alexander nodded once. "Then normal ends for him too." Across the country, Michael Reynolds was learning exactly how fragile normal could be. The brownstone felt cavernous now, echoing with absence. Victoria had moved to a smaller condo in the Gold Coast after the first wave of creditor letters arrived. She claimed it was for health reasons, but Michael knew it was to distance herself from the coming storm. He rattled around the big house alone, heating frozen dinners in the microwave, drinking more than he should, jumping at every notification on his phone. January brought no relief. A routine credit line renewal was denied outright, no explanation beyond a vague reference to increased risk profile. 2 long-term clients shifted contracts overnight to a rival firm out of Indianapolis. An unannounced DOT inspection at the Joliet terminal uncovered logbook discrepancies going back 2 years. Operations suspended pending review. Michael spent hours on conference calls, voice hoarse from pleading. "We've been partners for 12 years, he told one supplier. "Give me 30 days. The reply was polite but final. "Cash on delivery from now on, no exceptions." Local business journals started running cautious pieces. Reynolds Logistics faces headwinds in tight credit market. Michael read them on his tablet in the dark living room, the blue glow harsh against his unshaven face. He told himself it was just a cycle, that every company hit rough patches. But deep down, a colder suspicion took root. One night, after another fruitless day of firefighting, he dug through a box of papers he'd meant to shred months ago. Sarah's hospital discharge folder was there, tucked beneath old tax returns. He opened it with shaking hands. The indentation where the lockbox had pressed against the cardboard was still visible. Something important had been inside. Something she'd taken with her into the snow. He stared at that faint rectangle for a long time, a sick realization blooming in his gut. She hadn't left with nothing after all. In the estate's lower level, a secure wing that looked more like a high-tech operations center than a basement, Sarah was becoming someone new. Marcus, the former hedge fund wizard, walked her through holographic projections of Reynolds Logistics' balance sheet. Red lines spiderwebbed across glowing debt obligations. "They're levered 4-to-1, he explained calmly. "Any significant downgrade triggers margin calls. We don't have to fabricate anything, just illuminate what's already there." Lila, sharp-eyed and softer-spoken than Sarah expected, laid out the legal framework. "Every regulatory tip comes from verifiable records. Every credit signal is based on public filings. When the house falls, no one will be able to point to a single illegal hand." Ramirez handled physical and digital security. "Michael started searching your old name online," he reported one morning. "Basic stuff, social media, public records. He's hitting dead ends because we built the walls years ago." Sarah absorbed it all with a focus that surprised even her. She asked questions that cut to the core. How long until payroll misses? What happens to the employees? Can we direct any asset sales toward pension obligations first? The team exchanged glances, approval, respect. Alexander watched from the sidelines, pride warring with old regrets. "You're better at this than I ever was," he told her during a rare moment alone. "I built walls. You're learning when to open gates." Sarah shook her head. "I'm learning when to stop holding doors for people who'd let me freeze." February crept closer, bringing heavier snow to Chicago and the first hints of spring bulbs pushing through mulch in the estate's greenhouse. The quadruplets hit 10 weeks, smiling now, tracking faces, cooing in response to Sarah's voice. She recorded every milestone on a private drive, knowing these early months were treasures she'd nearly lost. Meanwhile, Reynolds Logistics bled out slowly, publicly, painfully. A major lender filed to foreclose on 2 warehouses. The city quietly revoked a lucrative snow removal contract after new compliance concerns. Former employees began talking to reporters, nothing malicious, just honest recollections of stretched budgets and deferred maintenance. The narrative wrote itself, once proud Chicago firm undone by overextension and bad luck. Victoria's health deteriorated further. From her condo, she fired off angry emails to old connections, demanding help that never came. Michael visited when he could, bringing takeout she barely touched. "We'll fight this," he promised hollowly. She just looked at him with faded eyes and said, "You already lost the war, darling. You just didn't know it started the night you closed that door." Michael stopped sleeping. He drove aimlessly through snowy streets at 3 a.m., past shuttered storefronts and glowing hospital windows. He replayed that Christmas Eve in endless loops, Sarah's quiet voice saying his name one last time, the soft click of the lock, the way he'd turned his back convinced he was saving himself. One dawn, after another sleepless night, an anonymous text arrived on his burner work phone, a number he hadn't given anyone new in years. Dirksen Federal Courthouse. February 14th. 10 a.m. Come alone if you want to understand what you threw away. He stared at the message until the screen timed out. Valentine's Day. The irony tasted bitter. He went, of course. Through security, up marble stairs slick with melted snow tracked in by hundreds of boots, into the courtroom where a judge he'd once golfed with now signed the death warrant for Reynolds Logistics without looking up. When it was over, company dissolved, assets frozen pending liquidation, Michael wandered into the echoing hallway, coat unbuttoned despite the chill. People streamed past him like he was already a ghost. Then he saw her. Sarah stood near a window, winter light catching the subtle waves in her dark hair. She wore a simple charcoal coat, boots with no designer labels, and an expression of calm certainty that made her look taller than he remembered. No anger in her posture. No triumph. Just quiet finality. Michael's voice cracked. "Sarah." She turned, meeting his eyes without flinching. "You came. Everything that's happened, it's you, isn't it?" "I didn't create the cracks, Michael. I just stopped helping you hide them." He took a hesitant step closer. "The kids, please tell me they're okay." "They're perfect," she said softly. "Growing, healthy, loved beyond measure. They'll never wonder if they're wanted. They'll never stand in snow begging for shelter." Tears blurred his vision. "I was wrong. About everything. The money, the stress, what mattered, I was so wrong. If there's any way, there isn't." Her tone wasn't cruel, just absolute. "Some doors only open one direction. You slammed yours. I built a new one." He swallowed hard. "Who are you now? How is any of this possible?" Sarah glanced out the window at flurries dancing over the Chicago River. "I'm the woman you decided had no value. Turns out you were measuring with the wrong scale." She started to walk away. "Wait." His voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry every single day." Sarah paused, looked back once more. "I believe you. And one day, maybe that sorrow will make you a better man for someone else. But it won't reopen what you closed." Then she was gone, footsteps quiet on the marble, security shadows melting into the crowd behind her. Michael sank onto a bench, head in hands, as strangers flowed around him. Outside, snow kept falling, covering the city in layer after layer of white silence. Years later, Sarah Voss became a quiet force in American philanthropy, funding domestic violence escape programs, premature infant research centers, single-mother grants distributed without fanfare. The Quadruplets grew up surfing Pacific waves and hiking rainforest trails, secure in a love that never wavered. Michael rebuilt a small life driving for a union trucking company, living in a modest apartment on the north side. He volunteered weekends at women's shelters, carrying groceries, fixing plumbing, listening without judgment. He never remarried. Some winters, when the wind howled off the lake, he'd stand outside just to feel the cold, reminder and penance in equal measure. This is the real America we live in, friends, one where cruelty has consequences, where underestimating a quiet woman can cost everything, and where a mother's love, once forged in ice, becomes unbreakable steel. If this story of raw resilience, betrayal, and hard-won justice moved you deep in your soul, hit subscribe right now. We've got more coming that will shake you just as hard. And please, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? Braving the Midwest cold? Soaking up southern sun? Out on the West Coast like Sarah? Have you ever been counted out, only to rise stronger? Share your truth. You're part of this community, and your voice matters. As spring finally clawed its way into Chicago in late March 2026, the city looked bruised, piles of dirty snow lingering in parking lots, potholes yawning open on every street, the lake still a dull iron gray under reluctant sunshine. The brutal winter had taken its toll on more than just roads and spirits. For Michael Reynolds, it had stripped away the last illusions he'd clung to. He moved out of the Lincoln Park brownstone on a raw, drizzly morning, the kind of day that couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring. Movers, hired at fire sale rates, loaded what little he was keeping into a small truck, a bed, a couch, some boxes of clothes and books. Everything else went to auction to satisfy creditors. He stood on the wet sidewalk watching his mother's antique dining table disappear into the van, rain soaking through his thin jacket. The house that had been in the Reynolds family for 3 generations was gone, sold to a developer who planned to gut it for condos. Victoria had already retreated further, checking herself into an assisted living facility in Florida paid for by liquidating her last hidden brokerage account. She hadn't spoken to Michael in weeks. Her final words to him, delivered over a crackling phone line, were, "You should have listened to me about that girl from the beginning." He wasn't sure if she meant keeping Sarah or getting rid of her. It didn't matter anymore. Michael's new apartment was a 1-bedroom walk-up in Rogers Park, near the lake, but far from the glamour of his old life. The building smelled of old carpet and curry from neighboring kitchens. He took a job driving nights for a union freight company, long hauls to Milwaukee, Rockford, Indianapolis. The work was steady, the pay decent, and nobody asked about his past. On the road, with classic rock on the radio and endless highway stretching ahead, he could almost pretend the collapse hadn't happened. Almost. But every time he passed a billboard for a women's shelter or saw a news segment on premature babies, the memories rushed back. Sarah's face in the courthouse hallway. The knowledge that his children, 4 of them, were growing up somewhere without him. He'd tried searching once, late at night after a run, typing variations of her name into Google. Nothing. No social media, no public records, no trace. It was as if she'd been erased the same way he'd tried to erase her that Christmas Eve. He never searched again. Out on the Pacific coast, spring arrived early and gentle. Cherry blossoms exploded along the estate's private drive, petals drifting like pale snow onto manicured lawns. The quadruplets turned 6 months old in April, rolling over, sitting up with support, babbling strings of sounds that made Sarah's heart ache with joy. Pediatric checkups were flawless, weights in the 75th percentile, developmental milestones met or exceeded. The premature start that had nearly cost them everything was now just a footnote in their charts. Sarah's days had found a new rhythm. Mornings belonged entirely to the baby's feedings, tummy time, songs in the sunlit nursery. Afternoons shifted to the lower-level operations wing, where she'd begun taking a more active role in the Voss empire. Alexander insisted she learn every layer: clean energy investments in Texas wind farms, AI research partnerships with Stanford, quiet stakes in critical mineral mines in Nevada. He taught her the way he'd once taught himself, by doing. "You don't have to run it all now," he told her during a walk through the greenhouse, where orchids bloomed in defiant color. "But you need to understand how the pieces move. Power without knowledge is just noise." Sarah nodded, pushing the quad stroller along the gravel path. "I'm not doing this for power. I'm doing it so no one can ever put us out in the cold again." Alexander smiled, the expression softening decades of hard lines. "That's why you'll be better at it than I ever was." The team respected her quickly. Marcus started copying her on major trades. Lila brought contracts for review, valuing Sarah's instinct for buried risk. Even Ramirez, the most guarded, began sharing security briefings without prompting. They saw what Alexander saw, a woman who'd survived the worst and come out sharper, not bitter. But Sarah hadn't forgotten the human cost of the Reynolds collapse. When liquidation reports showed hundreds of former employees struggling, she quietly directed funds through anonymous channels, mortgage relief, job placement services, retraining grants. Not mercy for Michael or Victoria. Mercy for people who'd simply worked hard and been caught in the fallout. One warm May evening, as the sun set gold over the ocean, Alexander handed her a thick folder. Inside were incorporation papers for the Voss Family Foundation, her name at the top as chair. "I've spent my life building walls," he said. "You get to decide what to do with the view from the top of them." Sarah traced the embossed letterhead with one finger. "We start with mothers and babies," she said without hesitation. "Safe places to go when there's nowhere else. Neonatal units in underfunded hospitals. Grants for women starting over with nothing but their kids and their fight." Alexander's eyes shone. Already in motion. First Center breaks ground in Chicago this fall. She looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. "You weren't the only one watching that city." Summer unfolded in a blur of milestones. The quads turned one in June, a quiet celebration with just the household staff and Alexander. For smash cakes, for sets of sticky fingers, laughter echoing through the atrium. Sarah recorded every moment, building the childhood album she'd feared would never exist. Michael spent that same June driving extra routes to cover rent. On his birthday, alone in a diner off I-80, he allowed himself one beer and one memory. Sarah's smile the day they found out it was Quadruplets. Shock, then joy so bright it had scared him even then. He'd mistaken abundance for burden. The worst mistake of his life. Fall brought crisp air and change. In Chicago, the first Voss Foundation shelter opened in a renovated building on the west side, state-of-the-art medical wing for high-risk pregnancies, on-site daycare, job training, legal aid. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting with politicians. Just mothers walking through the doors with babies in their arms, finding warmth they hadn't dared hope for. Sarah flew in anonymously for the opening, watching from a discreet observation room as the first residents arrived. One woman, exhausted and tearful, clutched a newborn and whispered thank you to the intake worker. Sarah's throat tightened. She knew that exhaustion. She knew that whisper. Alexander stood beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Better than okay. This is what winning actually looks like." Back home, the children took their first steps in September, Aria leading the charge, determined and fearless, followed quickly by the others. The estate filled with the patter of tiny feet and delighted squeals. Sarah watched them chase each other across sun-warmed hardwood and felt something heal that she hadn't realized was still broken. Michael heard about the new shelter on the radio while stuck in traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. The announcer mentioned anonymous funding, no names attached. But something in the description, the focus on mothers turned away in crisis, made his chest ache. He pulled over on a side street, hands shaking on the wheel, and cried for the first time since the courthouse. Years slipped by like seasons. The Quadruplets grew tall and curious, Aria with her mother's quiet intensity, Blaze fearless on surfboards, Cove drawn to music, Drift always inventing something in the workshop Alexander built for them. They knew their grandfather's story, knew their mother's strength, knew the world could be cruel, but that love was fiercer. Sarah expanded the foundation steadily, shelters in Detroit, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Houston. Neonatal research that saved thousands of premature babies. Scholarships for first-generation college students raised by single mothers. All of it quiet, efficient, unstoppable. Alexander aged gracefully, stepping back more each year, content to watch his daughter become the force he'd always known she could be. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the terrace watching sunsets paint the sky, talking about everything and nothing. "You ever think about going back?" he asked once, meaning Chicago. Sarah considered. "Not to live. But I go when the new centers open. I need to see the doors stay open for women who have nowhere else. He nodded. Good doors. Michael kept driving trucks until his back wouldn't let him anymore. Then he took a dispatcher job, steady hours, benefits. Every weekend, he volunteered at the Chicago VA shelter, stocking shelves, fixing leaky faucets, listening to women's stories without ever offering his own. The staff knew him as Reliable Mike, nothing more. He liked it that way. One December evening in 2032, exactly 7 years after that Christmas Eve, Michael stood outside the shelter after his shift. Snow fell softly, the kind that muffled the city and made everything feel possible again. He watched mothers arrive with children bundled against the cold, doors opening wide to let them in. He whispered into the night, knowing no one would hear, "They're safe because of you, Sarah." "Thank you." Somewhere across the country, under a different sky, Sarah tucked her teenagers into bed after a day of laughter and chaos. She kissed each forehead, Aria, Blaze, Cove, Drift, and felt the same fierce love that had carried her through the darkest night of her life. This is America at its rawest and realest, friends, where betrayal can shatter everything, but resilience rebuilds it stronger. Where quiet women carry worlds on their backs and, when pushed too far, move mountains in return. Where a mother's love doesn't just endure. It changes the world. If this story of survival, justice, and the long road to healing hit you right in the heart, smash that subscribe button. We've got more True Grit journeys coming that will leave you speechless. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from tonight? Snow on the ground in the Midwest? Palm trees swaying in Florida? Rain on the roof out west? Have you ever had to rebuild from absolute zero? Share your fire. This community is built on stories like yours, and everyone matters. By the time the Quadruplets turned 10 in the summer of 2035, the Pacific Northwest estate had become less a fortress and more a home filled with noise, color, and controlled chaos. The once pristine hallways echoed with the thud of basketballs, the strum of guitars, and the occasional shouted argument over whose turn it was on the gaming console Alexander had reluctantly installed in the media room. Sarah watched it all with a quiet amazement that never quite faded. This was the life she'd fought for on a frozen doorstep a decade earlier. Aria, the eldest by 3 minutes, had grown into a serious, dark-haired girl with her mother's watchful eyes and a passion for coding that rivaled anything Marcus could throw at her. Blaze, broad-shouldered and sunbrowned from endless hours surfing the cold Pacific breaks, played varsity soccer at the private school they all attended under carefully guarded identities. Cove, quieter and more introspective, spent hours composing music on the grand piano in the atrium, his melodies drifting through the house like gentle ghosts. Drift, the inventor, the tinkerer, had already turned the old workshop into a mini-lab, building drones and robots that occasionally escaped and terrified the housekeeping staff. Alexander, now in his late 70s, moved slower but still commanded respect with a single raised eyebrow. He'd officially handed day-to-day control of the Voss empire to Sarah 5 years earlier, though he remained chairman emeritus and her most trusted advisor. Together they'd grown the portfolio beyond anything he'd imagined in his hidden years: sustainable infrastructure across the Southwest, biotech startups revolutionizing neonatal care, quiet ownership of media companies that amplified stories of resilience without ever revealing the source. The Voss Family Foundation had become one of the most effective philanthropies in America, though few knew its true scale. By 2035, it operated 43 women's and children's centers nationwide, from rural Appalachia to South Central Los Angeles, plus mobile neonatal units that deployed to disaster zones and under-resourced hospitals. Sarah traveled frequently to oversee new openings, always incognito, always watching from the sidelines as mothers walked through doors that would never slam shut on them. Michael Reynolds turned 50 that year, a milestone he marked alone with a cup of coffee on the tiny balcony of his Rogers Park apartment. The view was of other brick buildings and a sliver of Lake Michigan on clear days, nothing like the sweeping vistas of his old life. His back had forced him off the road permanently 2 years earlier, but the dispatcher job at the freight company had evolved into a supervisor role, decent pay, health insurance, a small pension building. He'd grown comfortable in anonymity. Every Saturday, rain or shine, He still volunteered at the original Chicago VOS shelter on the west side. The staff had changed over the years, but the mission hadn't. He fixed plumbing, painted walls, assembled cribs, and when asked, sat with new residents who needed someone to listen without judgment. He never told his story. They never asked. It was enough to be useful. One October afternoon in 2035, during a routine supply run to the shelter, Michael overheard two staff members talking in the storage room. "The founder's supposed to visit next week," one said, stacking diapers. "Anonymous, like always, but they say she's bringing her kids this time. Wants them to see the work firsthand." Michael froze behind a pallet of formula, heart hammering. 10 years. He hadn't allowed himself to imagine seeing Sarah again, let alone the children he'd never held. He finished unloading in silence, mind racing. Sarah had indeed decided it was time. The quadruplets were old enough to understand parts of the story, not the full cruelty yet, but the essence, that their mother had once needed help, and now they helped others. She booked a private jet under a shell company name, arranged discreet security, and planned a low-key visit to the Chicago center that had started it all. They arrived on a crisp Friday morning, the kind of autumn day that made the city glow, leaves blazing red and gold along the lakefront, sky a perfect blue. Sarah wore jeans and a simple sweater, hair pulled back, no jewelry except the small eagle pendant Elena had left her. The kids tumbled out of the SUV in a burst of energy, backpacks slung over shoulders, eyes wide at the unfamiliar urban landscape. The shelter director greeted them warmly but discreetly, leading them through the renovated building, the bright daycare rooms filled with laughing toddlers, the medical wing with state-of-the-art incubators humming softly, the community kitchen where residents prepared meals together. Sarah watched her children's faces, curiosity, empathy, pride blooming as they understood what this place meant. In the multipurpose room, volunteers were setting up for a weekend event. Michael was there, on a ladder painting a mural border, overalls splattered with soft blue. He climbed down to grab more paint and turned, and stopped dead. Sarah stood 20 feet away, surrounded by 4 tall, healthy 10-year-olds who looked unmistakably like both their parents. Time collapsed. For a moment, the room narrowed to just the two of them. Michael's paintbrush clattered to the floor. Sarah's breath caught, but she recovered first. She walked forward slowly, the children trailing curiously. "Michael," she said quietly. No anger. No accusation. Just acknowledgement. He couldn't speak at first. His eyes moved from her face to the kids, Aria's serious gaze, Blaze's athletic build, Cove's gentle smile, Drift's restless energy. Tears welled instantly. "They're beautiful," he managed, voice rough. Sarah nodded. "They are." The quadruplets looked between the adults, sensing the weight but not yet understanding it. Aria stepped forward first, ever the bold one. "Are you one of the volunteers Mom told us about? The ones who keep this place running?" Michael swallowed hard. "Yeah, kiddo. Something like that." Sarah watched the exchange, something knotted in her chest. 10 years of distance, of deliberate separation, and here they were in the same room because of doors she'd opened for others. She spoke softly. "We're just visiting today. Showing them where it all started." Michael nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of a paint-stained hand. "Good. They should see it." Blaze piped up. "Mom said this was the first one. That it helped a lot of people who had nowhere to go." Michael met Sarah's eyes over their son's head. "It helped more than you'll ever know." Sarah held his gaze for a long moment. Forgiveness wasn't the right word, too simple for what had passed between them. But acceptance, perhaps. Recognition of two very different paths that had somehow intersected again in service. She touched Aria's shoulder. "Come on, guys. Let's see the garden." As they moved away, Drift hung back a second, studying Michael with inventor's curiosity. "You dropped your brush," he said, picking it up and handing it over. Michael took it, fingers brushing the boys. "Thanks, son." Drift grinned and ran to catch up. Michael stood there long after they'd gone, staring at the wet paint on the wall until it blurred. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. Seeing them healthy, happy, whole, that was more than he'd ever dared hope for. Sarah felt the encounter settle into her like a final puzzle piece. Later, on the flight home, Cove asked quietly, "That man knew you, didn't he?" She considered how much truth they were ready for. "Yes. A long time ago, he was part of my life. Things ended badly. But today, he's helping people the way I try to. Sometimes that's enough." Cove nodded, accepting it for now. Back at the estate, life resumed its rhythm. The children returned to school projects and sports practices. Sarah threw herself into the next phase of the foundation, expanding into rural areas where maternal mortality rates remained stubbornly high. Alexander, watching it all from his favorite terrace chair, told her one evening, "You turned survival into salvation." Not many manage that. She smiled, watching the kids play soccer on the lawn as sunset painted the sky. "I had help. From you. From them. From every woman who walked through those doors and kept going." Alexander raised his glass of sparkling water in a toast. "To open doors." Sarah clinked hers against it. "To open doors." In Chicago, Michael kept volunteering. He never mentioned the visit to anyone, but something shifted in him after that day. He smiled more easily. He mentored teenage boys at the shelter's youth program, teaching them basic mechanics and, quietly, the cost of cruelty. He saved carefully and, on the 10th anniversary of the shelter's opening, made an anonymous donation large enough to fund an entire new wing. The director announced it at a staff meeting. "Someone who believes deeply in our mission just gave us the biggest single gift we've ever received." No name. Just a note that said, "For the ones who need a door held open." Michael heard about it on his drive home, smiled at the red light, and whispered to the empty truck cab, "You're welcome, Sarah." Life moved forward as it does. The children grew into teenagers with dreams of their own, Arya heading to MIT for computer science, Blaze earning college soccer scholarships, Cove touring with a youth orchestra, Drift patenting his first invention at 17. Sarah guided without controlling, loved without condition, built without boasting. Alexander passed peacefully in his sleep at 83, surrounded by family. His final words to Sarah were simple, "You did better than I ever dreamed." She buried him on the estate grounds under a grove of cherry trees, the place he loved most. The empire continued seamlessly under her leadership, ethical, innovative, protective. Michael retired at 65 to a small house up in Wisconsin, near enough to Chicago to visit the shelter, but far enough for quiet. He kept volunteering until his hands shook too much to hold a wrench, then shifted to storytelling, reading to kids in the daycare, sharing sanitized versions of his life that always ended with, "And sometimes people mess up bad, but you can still choose to do good after." One spring day in 2045, 20 years after that Christmas Eve, Sarah brought her now-adult children back to Chicago for the Foundation's anniversary gala, not anonymous this time. She decided it was time to step into the light. The event honored 2 decades of work, raising funds for the next 20. Michael watched the live stream from his Wisconsin porch, glass of iced tea in hand. Sarah stood on stage in a simple navy dress, hair threaded with silver but posture straight as ever, speaking about resilience and second chances and doors that should never close on those who need them most. Behind her, photos cycled on a screen, mothers holding newborns, children laughing in daycare, graduates in caps and gowns. And one image, the original shelter's front doors, painted bright blue, always open. Michael raised his glass to the screen. "You won, Sarah." "Beautifully." Across the miles, Sarah finished her speech with words she'd carried for 20 years. "We don't get to choose the nights that break us. But we do get to choose what we build in the morning after. Thank you for believing in mornings." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Her children, tall, confident, kind, joined her on stage, arms around her. And somewhere in the crowd, though neither knew it, a former volunteer from the very first shelter wiped tears and clapped hardest of all. This is the America that endures, friends, the one where pain can be transformed into purpose, where betrayal doesn't get the final word, where a mother's fierce love doesn't just protect her own children, but lifts thousands more. Where doors once slammed shut become doors flung wide open for generations. If this decades-long journey of justice, healing, redemption, and unbreakable family moved you like nothing else, hit that subscribe button. We're telling more stories of real American grit that will stay with you forever. And please, pour your heart into the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? City lights in New York? Quiet fields in Iowa? Ocean waves in California? Have you walked through a door someone held open when you had nowhere else? Or held one open yourself? Tell us. These stories live because of you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one. As the years rolled into the 2050s, America itself had changed in ways no one could have predicted back in that frozen winter of 2025. Climate shifts brought warmer winters to the Midwest and wilder storms to the coasts. Cities like Chicago invested heavily in green infrastructure, turning old industrial corridors into parks and vertical farms. Self-driving trucks dominated long-haul freight, quietly ending the era of drivers like Michael had been. AI reshaped everything from healthcare to education, but human connection, the kind built in community kitchens and shelter daycares, remained stubbornly irreplaceable. Sarah Voss, now in her late 50s, had silver streaks threading through her dark hair like highlights earned through fire. She wore them proudly, along with the faint lines around her eyes that came from decades of laughing with her children and crying with women who'd arrived at her centers with nothing but hope and fear. The Voss empire had grown into one of the most influential forces in ethical capital, funding fusion energy breakthroughs in the Mountain West, regenerative agriculture across the Great Plains, and universal neonatal screening programs that had slashed infant mortality rates nationwide. The foundation now operated over 100 centers, plus international partnerships in Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Sarah had taken it global quietly, the way she did everything. No splashy announcements, no naming rights on buildings. Just results. Mothers safe. Babies healthy. Families rebuilt. The Quadruplets, Aria, Blaze, Cove, and Drift, were in their mid-20s now, each carving paths that reflected their mother's values, but in their own voices. Aria, brilliant and focused, had graduated MIT summa cum laude and returned to the Pacific Northwest to lead the Voss Tech division. She specialized in AI for social good, algorithms that detected domestic violence patterns in hospital data, predictive models that flagged at-risk pregnancies early, privacy-first systems that protected vulnerable users. She'd inherited Alexander's strategic mind and Sarah's moral compass, a combination that made boardrooms nervous and beneficiaries safe. Blaze, ever the athlete, had played professional soccer briefly for the Seattle Sounders before a knee injury sidelined him. He pivoted without bitterness, founding a nonprofit that brought sports programs to under-resourced communities. His camps ran in Voss centers across the country, teaching kids not just skills, but confidence, teamwork, the knowledge that their bodies were theirs to command, not fear. Cove, the musician, had studied at Juilliard and was now an acclaimed composer. His first major work, a symphony titled Doors, premiered in Chicago to standing ovations. It wove together recorded voices of shelter residents, laughter, lullabies, stories of survival, with orchestral swells that critics called heartbreaking and triumphant in the same breath. He dedicated every performance to the mothers who carried us all. Drift, the inventor, had turned his childhood tinkering into a clean energy startup that revolutionized rural microgrids. His modular solar and battery systems powered remote Voss clinics in places where the traditional grid would never reach. He held dozens of patents, but insisted on open-sourcing the core designs. Power shouldn't be hoarded. Neither should safety. Sarah watched their lives unfold with the same quiet amazement she'd felt when they were toddlers chasing each other across the estate lawn. Family dinners were loud, opinionated, loving debates over policy, music choices, the best surfing spots in winter. They called her Mom in public and Sarah when they wanted to tease her about being too serious. She cherished both. Michael Reynolds turned 70 in 2055, living simply in his Wisconsin lake house. Arthritis had slowed him, but his mind stayed sharp. He spent mornings fishing off his small dock, afternoons reading on the porch, evenings video calling old friends from the shelter days. He'd never remarried, never sought spotlight or sympathy. His life had narrowed to a peaceful rhythm: coffee at dawn, volunteering remotely by training new maintenance coordinators via video, quiet gratitude at dusk. He followed the Voss Foundation's work through public reports and occasional news clips. He saw Heiress' face on a tech conference panel, Blaze coaching kids in a viral video, Cove's symphony streamed live, Drift accepting an innovation award. He felt pride like a grandfather might, distant, unspoken, but deep. One autumn day in 2058, an envelope arrived in his mailbox, no return address, elegant cream paper. Inside was an invitation, the dedication of the Elena Thompson Memorial Wing at the original Chicago Center, named for Sarah's mother. The note read simply, "We'd be honored if you'd join us. No obligations. Just celebration." Michael stared at it for days, hands trembling. 33 years since that Christmas Eve. He hadn't seen Sarah since the shelter visit with the 10-year-olds. He booked a train ticket south. The dedication was held on a golden October afternoon, leaves swirling in gentle breezes around the expanded campus. The new wing housed advanced research labs and a museum of the Foundation's history, photos, stories, artifacts from residents past and present. Hundreds gathered: staff, donors, alumni families, politicians who'd finally caught on to the quiet revolution. Sarah stood at the podium in a deep green dress, hair fully silver now but eyes as clear as ever. Her children flanked her, Arya steady at her right, Blaze protective behind, Cove and Drift sharing a proud glance. She spoke without notes. "This wing honors my mother, Elena, who taught me that silence can be strength and that real protection doesn't always look loud. She never lived to see this work, but every door we open carries her name." The crowd applauded warmly. Then Sarah did something unexpected. "I want to recognize someone who's been part of this place longer than almost anyone," she said. A volunteer who showed up every weekend for decades, fixed what was broken, listened without judgment, and asked for nothing in return. "Mike Reynolds, would you stand?" Michael, seated quietly in the back row, felt every eye turn. He rose slowly, face flushed, hands clasped in front of him. The applause started polite, then swelled as people realized who he was, the reliable fixture they'd all known simply as Mike. Sarah met his eyes across the crowd and nodded once. Not forgiveness displayed for applause. Just acknowledgement. Truth. After the ceremony, families mingled on the lawn. Michael lingered near the new wing's entrance, unsure whether to approach. Then Drift, tall, lanky, unmistakable, walked up with a grin. "You're the famous Mike," he said, extending a hand. "Mom said you taught half the staff how to fix leaky faucets." Michael shook it, chuckling. "Guilty." One by one, the others joined, Arya with her analytical warmth, Blaze with an easy clap on the shoulder, Cove offering quiet thanks for keeping the piano tuned all those years ago. They didn't know the full history. They didn't need to. They saw a good man who'd done good work. Sarah approached last, the crowd thinning around them. "You came," she said softly. "Couldn't miss Elena's day," he replied. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching children play on the lawn. "You built something extraordinary," Michael said finally. "I'm proud to have carried a few bricks." Sarah smiled, the expression gentle. "You carried more than you know." No grand declarations. No dramatic reconciliation for an audience. Just two people who'd walked very different roads meeting at an intersection built on redemption. Michael returned to Wisconsin lighter than he'd been in decades. He lived another 10 years, passing peacefully at 80, surrounded by photos of shelter kids he'd watched grow up and letters from residents he'd helped. His small estate went entirely to the Chicago Center, enough to endow a maintenance scholarship in perpetuity. Sarah carried on into her 70s, guiding the foundation through new challenges: climate displacement, AI-driven inequality, global maternal health crises. Her children took the reins gradually, each bringing their strengths, the empire evolving but never losing its core: protect the vulnerable, open doors, measure success in lives changed. In 2075, on the 50th anniversary of that Christmas Eve night, the original shelter hosted a celebration. Sarah, now 80, attended with her grandchildren, Aria's twins, Blaze's daughter, Cove and Drift's kids, a new generation running through the halls with the same joy her own had once known. A plaque was unveiled in the entryway, simple bronze letters. In memory of those who needed shelter and those who held the door. May it never close on anyone again. Sarah stood before it, hand resting on the cool metal, feeling Elena's presence, Alexander's pride, even Michael's quiet atonement woven into the words. Later, under string lights in the garden, the family gathered. Grandchildren chased fireflies. Great-grandchildren, Sarah's first, born to Aria's daughter, slept in carriers nearby. Laughter rose and fell like music. One of the older shelter alumni, now a doctor who'd grown up in the program, approached Sarah. "Your mom saved my life," she said. "And you saved my kids." "Thank you." Sarah hugged her, tears shining. "We just held the door. You walked through and built the world bigger." That night, back at the estate that had long since become a multi-generational home, Sarah sat on the terrace watching stars emerge over the ocean. Her eldest great-grandchild toddled over, offering a dandelion puff. She took it, made a wish she didn't need to voice, and blew the seeds into the breeze. Doors open. Lives continue. Love, once forged in the coldest night, warms generations. This is the truest America there is, friends, the one built not on perfect beginnings, but on fierce continuations. Where one woman's refusal to break becomes thousands of women's strength to rise. Where cruelty's echo fades against the sound of doors swinging wide for everyone who needs them. Where a mother's fight on a frozen doorstep 50 years ago still holds the world open today. If this half-century saga of pain transformed into purpose, of justice blooming into generations of good, of a family's unbreakable love changing countless lives moved you beyond words, hit subscribe. We'll keep telling these epic stories of real American heart as long as you're here with us. And please, fill the comments with your light. Where are you watching from tonight? City skyline or country stars? Have you been the one needing the door held open or the one holding it? Has someone's resilience inspired you to keep going? Share it all. These stories aren't just told, they're lived through every one of you. Thank you for walking this long road with us. From our family to yours, keep the doors open. See you in the next story. As the 2080s dawned, the world had settled into a new equilibrium, one shaped in no small part by quiet forces like the Voss legacy. Fusion energy grids lit cities without carbon scars. Vertical farms and rewilded corridors cooled urban heat islands. AI companions eased loneliness for the elderly, while human-led programs, like those run by the ever-expanding Voss Foundation, ensured no one slipped through the cracks of progress. Sarah Voss celebrated her 85th birthday in 2082 with the kind of gathering that would have overwhelmed her younger self, the estate bursting with 4 generations. Great-grandchildren scampered through the halls that had once been silent fortresses. Teenagers practiced holograms in the media room. Young adults debated policy over dinner with the same fire their parents had shown decades earlier. Sarah herself had stepped back from daily operations years ago, passing the Foundation's leadership to a council chaired by Aria, with Blaze, Cove, and Drift as lifelong advisors. The empire, now a blend of ethical investment, innovation, and philanthropy, ran smoother than ever, guided by principles etched into its charter: protect the vulnerable, measure wealth in lives improved, never hoard power. But Sarah remained the heart. She traveled less now, preferring video calls from the terrace overlooking the ocean that had watched her heal. Her silver hair was cropped short for convenience, her eyes still sharp behind simple glasses. Arthritis slowed her hands, but not her spirit. She spent mornings reading letters from shelter alumni, doctors, teachers, engineers, parents, who credited open doors for their lives. Michael Reynolds had passed peacefully in 2068, but his presence lingered in small ways. The maintenance scholarship bearing his name had funded hundreds of tradespeople who kept Voss centers running worldwide. A quiet garden bench at the original Chicago site carried a plaque. In memory of Mike Reynolds, he fixed what was broken, including himself. The Quadruplets, now in their late 40s and early 50s, had families of their own blending seamlessly into the estate's rhythm. Arya and her wife raised 3 children, 2 biological, 1 adopted, who grew up bilingual in code and compassion. Arya's AI systems had become global standards for ethical data use in social services, preventing abuse before it escalated, routing aid where it was needed most. Blaze and his husband coached youth teams that fed into national pipelines, but more importantly, built character in kids from tough backgrounds. Their daughter, a fierce midfielder with her father's build, had already earned college scholarships while volunteering at Voss sports camps. Cove, partnered with a fellow composer, toured less now but mentored young artists through foundation grants. Their 2 children, one a budding cellist, the other a sound engineer, filled the house with music that carried forward the themes of Doors into new generations. Drift and his partner ran the clean energy arm from a converted barn on the estate grounds, their 4 kids, 2 biological, 2 fostered, testing prototypes in the old workshop. Drift's open-source grids powered Voss clinics on 5 continents, bringing light and refrigeration to places long forgotten. Family gatherings were legendary, Thanksgiving tables stretching through multiple rooms, summer barbecues on the beach below the cliffs, winter solstice concerts in the atrium. Sarah presided quietly, soaking in the noise that had once been her deepest wish. In 2085, the foundation marked its 60th anniversary with events worldwide, but the centerpiece remained Chicago, the original shelter now a sprawling campus integrating housing, education, healthcare, and community innovation. Sarah insisted on attending in person, despite her children's gentle protests about the travel. The celebration spanned a weekend in crisp autumn weather, much like the dedication decades earlier. Thousands gathered, alumni from every era, staff past and present, partners from around the globe. Holographic displays trace the foundation's journey, photos evolving from grainy early shots to vibrant modern images of thriving families. On the final evening, under a tent strung with warm lights, the next generation took the stage. Arya spoke of ethical text responsibility. Blaze shared stories of kids finding their strength on playing fields. Cove conducted a new piece performed by shelter youth orchestras linked virtually from 10 countries. Drift unveiled plans for atmospheric water generators that would bring clean drinking water to climate-stressed regions. Then they invited Sarah forward. She walked slowly with a cane carved from estate cedar, but her voice carried clear and strong. 60 years ago, she began, I stood in snow with 4 newborns and nowhere to go. A door slammed behind me. But another opened because someone somewhere had prepared for nights like that. The crowd listened in hushed attention. I didn't do this alone. My father built the walls that protected us. My mother taught me silence could be power. Volunteers like Mike Reynolds held tools and hearts steady. And every woman who walked through our doors brought courage that inspired the next. She paused, eyes shining. Tonight, I'm stepping back completely. The foundation belongs to all of you now, to my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and every family we've served. Keep the doors open. Keep measuring success by how many people get to walk through them into better tomorrows. The standing ovation lasted minutes. Her family surrounded her on stage, dozen-strong arms linked in a chain that spanned generations. Later, back at the estate, Sarah sat on her favorite terrace bench as stars emerged. The house glowed behind her with laughter and music drifting on the breeze. A great-granddaughter, barely 3, with Arya's serious eyes, climbed into her lap holding a glowing firefly jar. Gamma Sarah, she lisped, why do we keep doors open? Sarah kissed her soft hair. Because once, a long time ago, someone kept one open for me and your great-great-uncles and aunts. And we promised to pay it forward forever. The child nodded solemnly, satisfied. Sarah looked out over the dark ocean, feeling the long arc of her life settle into peace. From a frozen doorstep in 2025 to this moment in 2085, from one mother fighting for 4 babies to millions of lives touched, she'd kept the promise. The firefly jar twinkled like stars brought close. Laughter rose from inside. Doors stood open everywhere. And the story, hers, theirs, ours, continued. This is the America worth believing in, friends, the one that stretches across decades, turning individual survival into collective thriving. where one act of cruelty becomes the spark for generations of compassion, where a mother's refusal to break on a winter night echoes forward into centuries of open doors, where love, tested in the coldest darkness, proves strong enough to warm the world, where love, tested in the coldest darkness, proves strong enough to warm the world. We've walked this extraordinary half-century journey together, from heartbreak to healing, from justice to joy, from one woman's fight to an unbreakable legacy touching millions. If this final chapter of redemption completed, purpose fulfilled, family enduring, and doors forever open left you with tears, hope, and fire in your heart, hit subscribe. We'll keep sharing these epic tales of real American soul, the ones that remind us who we can be when we choose compassion over cruelty. And please, light up the comments one last time. Where are you watching from as this story ends? City glow or quiet countryside? Have you held a door open for someone? Had one held for you? What legacy do you want to leave? Pour it all out. This community is family now, and every story you share keeps more doors open. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for every step of this road. Keep fighting. Keep loving. Keep the doors wide. Until the next story begins.